Welcome to this introduction to the Spanish Baroque harp, also called the arpa de dos órdenes. The instrument that you see in front of you is a replica of instruments that were in Europe around the end of the 16th and the beginning of the 17th centuries. The history of the Spanish Baroque harp tells a very cosmopolitan story. The first harps in Europe were introduced by the Moors when she conquered Spain, and from these Moorish instruments the first instruments in Europe started to evolve, like the Gothic harp, which was also very well known in France, and then later on the Baroque instruments started to develop. During the 18th century these instruments were starting to fade from all knowledge, and the bigger and more brilliant concert harps were starting to get very popular. There was a demand in more sound and a more delicate and brilliant sound, and with the Baroque instruments, of course, the sound is a bit smaller and they are a lot like lute instruments. So very few Baroque harps did actually survive the times, so we will be looking at a few of them. Fortunately enough, the Spanish conquistador took the Spanish harp to the New World. Even today, South American folk ensembles still use a folk harp that has great similarities to the Spanish Baroque harp. For instance, the wide bass end and narrow treble end. I can also show you it on my instrument. If you see the bottom, it's quite wide, and here at the top it's quite narrow. Apart from that, the historical harp builders in Europe of our day were able to reconstruct these major and majestic instruments of the time by the use of paintings, to rekindle a very old Baroque sound that was for long lost. So what is the difference between the Spanish Baroque harp and the concert harps that we see in orchestras today? The first thing that we notice is that there aren't any pedals. This instrument doesn't need any pedals, and that has to do with a few things. So at first, when we look at this instrument, we see that it is an X-strung harp. What does that mean? Well, the strings makes this X in the middle. If I feel with my fingers over the strings, I notice that there's a place where they actually come very close together. That is the place where we want to play, especially with the right hand, so that I can play major or even minor chords without any problem. If we look at this long row of strings, that would be the longest one going from up here to the end, we see that there are red and dark colored strings as well. This is the diatonic string line, so to speak. That means C, D, E, F, G, A, B, and again C, and so it goes on. And then we have the other side where you notice 3, 2, 3, 2, 3, 2 groups. So if we, of course, think of the piano, we notice that this must be, the, so to speak, white keys of the piano compared to the other side with the black keys. The interesting thing, though, is that because of this X-strung shape, it is possible for both hands to play all the strings. I can play with my left hand even up to here, up to here. I can also play it with the right hand. Okay, so where do I need to play? We will come to that right now. So where do I play with my right hand? I try to find the space where these two rows really come together, and I just put my right hand a bit above that place, the center, so to speak, so that I will be able to play the sharps as well as the flats. Then the left hand plays a bit lower than this middle, or this center place where I find the cross, so the crossing. So I put my left hand a bit lower, and by doing so, the sound has a very deep kind of texture, which is quite different when I play exactly the same strings with the right hand. It has a more lute sound or a guitaric sound. This obviously makes it a bit difficult technically because the left hand plays with the thumb upwards, especially when I have to get, for instance, that was now a B flat, I have to grip inside for the next string. With this hand it's a bit different because I can't grip inside, it's too narrow. So I have to put my thumb a bit downwards, so to be able to get the flats or the sharps. So we notice this instrument has a very unique situation, that we actually have two instruments in one. We have a harp sound, we also have a lute sound, and this very lute and guitaric sound is what actually gives us this very Spanish feeling in the music. And at the same time we also have the harp sound. So the question you would probably want to ask is, who played these instruments? The harp was mostly heard in aristocratic circles. So the ensemble of the day were mostly consisting of harpists, then you had Baroque guitarists, you had singers, and you also had percussionists. And this typical combo can still be seen in South America. I gladly can speak of that because I've been in South America sometimes. And you also find this in the folk music again. In fact, the composer Lucas Ruiz de Ribayas of the piece played at the beginning of this introduction was a minor aristocrat, and he played his instrument as a keen amateur. In 1667, he travelled with the composer of the first opera, La Purpura de la Rosa, that was ever to be on stage, the first opera in the New World. And that was by the composer Tomás de Torrejón y Velasco. They both went to Peru. About 10 years later, when he returned to Madrid, Ribayas, he actually wrote a type of a treatise for harp and guitar. We don't really know which of both he played. Probably the guitar, but it could have been the harp as well. And the work is called Luz y Norte. Although he was not a professional, we learn a lot from the diagrams to be able to read the specific harp tablature that we play on the arpa de dos órdenes. So what music do Spanish Baroque harp players read and play? That's a very good question. I would like to show you a page from one of the most well-known treatises for this instrument, written by Diego Fernández de Huete in 1702. It shows the possible form of chords, doubling ground notes, etc. to the player for accompaniment, but there are also some popular dances of the day for solo harp. There he uses the same string numberings that were used in Luz y Norte by Ribayas. The strings are numbered from 1 to 7. So we start at the dark string, and then that would be number 1, and then I just go 2, 3, 4, 5. 5 would be the C string, 6, 7. 7 is then the E string, and the next F string would be the next number 1. So how do you really know which number 1 or which number 7 you play? Well, they have a way with that. In each octave the number differs by the means of using a line under the number, for instance 7 with a line under it, or sometimes a comma at the top. The rhythms are written on top of the bars and they resemble lute tablature. So if you play lute you would probably know what I'm talking about. I won't go into that now too much. Goethe also writes fingering. For instance, the thumb, the index finger and the third or middle finger. Those were the three fingers used to play this instrument. Of course, when we play octaves, we can also use the fourth finger. If the thumb is number 1, then the fourth finger would be the ring finger. But it was typical using these three fingers. So the dance rhythms that we have here in this treatise or book written by Goethe also resembles those of Ribayas in the meanings that we have the same dances. And these rhythms were so well known by that time that, for instance, Ribayas didn't even write the rhythms on top of the bars. We can find, for instance, dances like the Canarios, which was actually a dance danced on the Canary Islands, and they were also put in these albums. What other literature could we play on this instrument? Well, we know by manuscripts that the practice of using well-known arias, for instance, and rewriting or just embellishing on them and playing it then as a solo piece was very popular during the time, especially the beginning of 1700s. And because the harps of the Renaissance used to play organ literature of the day during the Renaissance, it was quite obvious that the harp also participated in playing harpsichord music of the 1700s. So it wouldn't be very funny to hear, for instance, a harpsichord piece played on the Baroque instrument harp. So, where do you find Baroque harpists today? I thought I would put in this question, because who wants to play this instrument? An instrument for which we don't really have that much solo music, and which is actually also not very well known, maybe. Well, there are a number of different Baroque harp types. You have this Spanish instrument, then you also have the Italian arpa doppia, which also has 2 rows of strings. Then you also have the triple harp, also an Italian instrument that has 3 rows of strings. And then you also get other instruments like, for instance, the Welsh Baroque harp, which has a very peculiar form, but actually does the same work, I would say, as my instrument. So all of them have one thing in common. They're excellent accompaniment instruments, so you will find them playing continue music quite a lot. What does that mean? Well, they will be reading a figured bass and then embellishing on the chords with the right hand. There are also some practices that I can go deeper in when we're talking about this subject at some time. So you probably know the composer Monteverdi. You will find a harp in any of his operas. If not, then it was a bad choice, because Monteverdi explicitly wanted harps in his instrumentation. So the harp, what does it do in an ensemble? I find that the arpeggic characteristic really enhances the sound, starting from the bottom and just going up. And you have this very deep and grounding sound, and then a real nice brilliant sound at the top. I find that it's in any Baroque ensemble, if it's not maybe a Baroque orchestra, but a smaller group, it's a really nice sound. And it could be used with any instruments like the Baroque violin, but as well as the traverse flute and many other instruments, even recorders, also dating back to the Renaissance time. Those go very well together. So maybe at some stage we can talk about this again. I would be looking forward to that. Thank you very much.